Hi, my name is Sergio Vitesi. I play wind synth. Now I play the Yamaha WX5. Played for a number of years and I play in a band. I've developed my own rig, and lately I've been experimenting with loopers, and I've been really enjoying it, and posting some videos of me on my YouTube channel. And the last one I posted was a song by the Haggis Horns called The Traveller Part 2. It's a great song to loop to, and I've had a number of questions, people asking how I do certain things, especially how I switch between instrument sounds quickly. So I thought I'd do a video on how I made that song, how I looped it. And before I do that, I'll introduce you to my equipment setup, because it needs to be understood really so that you can see what I'm doing. At the end of my videos I show this slide, and that has my audio MIDI setup and the various bits of kit that I use, and I'll just quickly go into how they're connected together and what they do. So I've got a WX5, I've got a MIDI processor, I'll talk about that in a moment. I've got the MU50, Yamaha MU50 as a general MIDI sound generator. I've got a VL70 with a Patchman turbo chip, a Yamaha MG8 mixer, a Boss RC300 loop station, that's the loop I use, and then a PA. And for this setup I also use a dual foot switch. So I'll explain how they're connected and what they do. So to begin with, I connect my WX5 via the MIDI processor. I need a MIDI processor in my setup to do different things, to manipulate MIDI messages. It depends what you want to do, but when I play with my band, I like to do some backing occasionally, then switch to lead. I need to do things like, occasionally if I'm doing backing, I like to play chords. Of course the WX5 on its own isn't going to do that. I like to mesh together lots of instruments into one patch so that I can switch between them quickly. So I use a MIDI processor to perhaps split the note range into different instruments. I sometimes layer instruments, so you've got 2 or 3 different instruments on top of each other. And the other thing I like to do sometimes is to remap notes to, for example, if you want to transpose from a key you don't particularly like. I know it's probably not good practice, but that's an example of remapping notes, and the MIDI processor will do all that for me. There's different MIDI processors on the market. I couldn't really find one that met my needs, so I ended up designing this one myself. So the WX5 connects to the MIDI input of the processor, and by the way, I power the WX5 through that connection, and that connection is using the standard 5-pin MIDI as well. I had to adapt the WX5 in order to do that. If anyone's interested on how I did that, then just message me and I'll let you know. So power then WX5 through the MIDI input of the MIDI processor, and then the output of the MIDI processor connects to the MU50 and the VL70 in kind of daisy chain. So whatever signals are coming out of the MIDI processor go to both the MU50 and VL70. To understand how the MU50 and VL70 behave in this configuration, I just want to explain how I use the WX5 and how I send notes to each one of these 2 sound generators, because I like to use them in parallel. The VL70 is a single instrument patch and only one note monophonic instrument, so you can play one note from one instrument at a time. If you want another instrument, you have to select a different patch, whereas the MU50 can have 16 in multi-mode. The MU50 can have 16 instruments all playing at the same time, and you differentiate between the instruments by using different channels. So the way I use this setup, when I want to play the sound from the VL70, I'll send MIDI messages to channel 1. So VL70 responds to channel 1. Channel 1 of the MU50, I said it had 16 instruments, but the channel 1 is muted. So in fact, the way I use it, the MU50 has 15 instruments, any of which I can play, or all of them in fact, at the same time. And I do that by selecting channels 2 to 16, and I set up the MU50 so that a certain channel has a certain instrument. So the WX5 alone can't switch between channels, so that's why you need to have something to manipulate messages, and I do it via hardware. The other thing you'll notice about this setup is there's no PC or a Mac or tablet. I prefer not to use a PC, host PC in the setup, but maybe I'll change my mind in the future. I'm seeing lots of great examples of soft synths on the various Facebook groups, so maybe I'll change, but for now I use a hardware solution. If you have a computer in your configuration, then your MIDI manipulation selecting different channels could be done via that, and there's different MIDI processors on the market as well. So that's the basic reason I have the MIDI processor, and I'll configure it to, for example, if I split the WX5 note range, I can have one octave, for example, one octave will play channel 1 notes, so the VL70 will respond to that. I can set up another octave to play channel 3, another one to channel 7, and so on, so I can select between different instruments that way, and that doesn't involve pressing any buttons. I just play, and it can be done very quickly. Okay, so that's the MIDI inputs to the MU50 and the VL70. That they both generate audio outputs. They go into my mixer. I mix them, and then the output goes to the input of the loop station, so that I can record audio on the various tracks. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then the final mixed output comes from the Boss RC300 to a PA. So that's my setup. I just want to explain quickly also about patches, because you'll need to understand what I'm doing in the video when I get to it, the song, why I'm selecting different patches. The limitation of VL70 is, of course, that it's one instrument at a time. So if I want to pick a second instrument or a third from the VL70, I have to change the patch. The VL70 has 64 internal patches, and the way I set this up is that in a song I'll choose the instruments I want from the VL70, then I'll put them into the internal memory location starting at 1, and then I can just step through them as I need them in the song. Now the MIDI processor as well, the XCP1, also has 30 programs, and in each program it has different configuration settings. For example, I've mentioned mapping, I've mentioned splitting keys into different channels, overlaying instruments, so each program setting has a different configuration, and the way I use this is that I synchronize programs between the MIDI processor and the VL70. So when I select patch 1 or program 1, it's both program 1 on the MIDI processor and the VL70. Now all throughout this patch changing, the MU50 ignores all that. It just wants to see notes on different channels, and it will respond to it. So how do I select different patches? The WX5 has the ability to send program change, and so you send a program change, the MIDI processor will respond to that and also forward it, and the VL70 will also respond to it. So I can do that, and in my other videos that's what I actually do. I like to try and get away with the least amount of equipment that I need in a song. But in this song, there's one or two times where I need a quick program change, and taking the WX5 away from my mouth in order to press the right keys and then start playing again takes a bit of time, and it's also prone to errors if you're doing it quickly. So with the XCP1, I use a dual foot switch into the XCP1 to do the program change. I press the right key to go up and the left key to go down. So in the video you'll see me using the dual foot switch, and it's to select the different patches. So that's the setup that I use, and just before we get onto the song, just a few words about the loop station, so you know roughly what it does. I'm not an expert with this RC300, I just do what I need to make it work. I only use a fraction of its capability. You can look online for a manual to look at its capabilities. But it's got, in essence, it's got three separate independent tracks, 1, 2 and 3. And you can record an incoming audio signal. This is coming, as you remember, from the output of my sound, or the mixer, with the various sounds. And by pressing any of these tracks, the record play button, it's starting to record. And when you've finished the phrase you want to play, you press it again, and it's telling me now that it's replaying that signal. Of course, I haven't recorded anything, but you get the point. The red is saying it's recording. If you want to stop recording, you just press that again, and now this will be playing the incoming signal. I'll show you that in a moment. You can then stop the measure at any point. And this light here on track 3 tells me that I've recorded something on that track. If I press and hold the stop button, foot switch, it'll delete that. So I've got 3 different tracks, and I'll use each one of them in the video in that song by the Haggis Horns. Importantly, each one is only recording, when you press record, it only records the audio signal coming in. If another track is playing a sound and you record on a different track, it doesn't, of course, record the sound being created by another track, only what's coming in. So you can add different instruments at different times. Okay, so I'm going to now recreate the song and explain what I'm doing. Hopefully you'll find it useful. So we start with patch 1. And patch 1 is the guitar riff from the song. It's like this. And in that sound you'll hear a delay. In each note there's a delay. And I just really play that and lay it down on track 1. The other thing I do is at the end of that phrase on the original song, there's a guitar chord at the end of it. Now that is not a very nice guitar sound, that's from the MU50, but it allows chords to be played. I've mapped on the XCP1 MIDI processor, I've told it when it sees on patch 1 me playing E fingering to play a chord and send it to the channel. I can't remember which one, channel on the MU50 where there's a guitar. So that's how I do it. Before I record, there's one more thing to say about the looper, is that usefully it comes with a whole set of drum patterns. I'll just play a couple of them for you, just so that you can see. By turning that on, there's a basic beat, simple beat 1. So you get the point. There's a whole bunch of different drum beats you can use, and actually you can, because the MU50 that I'm using has a whole set of drum kits, you can create your own beats as well, but the problem is that you have to go through the loop several times to build it up. So when you're looping, if it's a fairly complex beat structure, you might have to do 3 or 4 passes before you build it up, and that can take time, it can be a bit boring. some of my other videos that have simple drum patterns on my YouTube channel, I do actually create the whole thing, including the drum track. But for this one, I don't. I use the drum capability, the drum tracks in the loop station. So now that you know that there's drum tracks, the other thing you can do with this is to assign drum tracks to different tracks, tracks 1, 2 and 3, and that's useful because what I do in this song is I start recording on track 1, and what I do is I do an intro drum sound, so I'll show you that now if I press track 1. So that's an intro. Whereas when I want to pick up into the main beat, I press start recording on track 2. So that's really useful. So to start the song off then, I play that guitar riff on track 1 with the intro beat. So that's laid down the intro, and that's recorded and it's looped, so I'll just carry on playing that. Then I select second patch, and on the second patch is the bass line and percussion, and the bass line comes in on track 2. Now, before I play the bass line, switching from track 1 to track 2, the simple intro beat to the more complex beat, one of the limitations of the RC300 drum patterns are that there aren't fills. It's just one pattern and then another, and so switching from one pattern, drum pattern to another is just straight with no fill, and it kind of sounds odd. So I'll show you. This is the basic pattern, and then I switch to a little more complex pattern. It's okay. But what I do is with this song is I actually use a snare drum, and I mapped it to the octave 1 G. So what I do is I do a quick fill. So that's a better transition, and then as soon as I'm in, I play the bass line, which is the no octaves basically, and the bass line I'm going to play is very simple. Okay, so drum fill, then bass, and that goes on to track 2, and that picks up the drum beat as well, and it sounds pretty good. So this is it in practice. Okay, so that's the main beat down, sounding pretty good. I've got a few other percussions that it's still in the same patch that I then overlay, and it's bongos and a woodblock. Now these are mapped again by the MIDI processor into a nice friendly fingering, because the original drum map on the MU50 puts them in different places, and you kind of sometimes have to switch between them, do some nasty fingering changes with octaves, and you know, with the WX5 it's quite responsive, so you sometimes get all the different percussion bits in between with ghost notes that you don't really want. So I put them into a nice friendly keynote range. So I press the upper octave, B and A are the bongos, and C is the woodblock. Okay, so I just add them to the track. Now I'll show you. Okay, so that's the main rhythm, doesn't change. And then from this point for a while I play different instruments on top. I'm not actually recording, I'm just playing on top. So the next one that I play are strings, so I select the next patch up. So one of the problems of the MU50 is that it doesn't respond to breath control. So when you play a note on the MU50, because it's an old piece of kit, it will sound at the initial volume that you play at, but then changing your breath won't change the volume. I could get a volume switch, but the way I've got around that is using the XCP1 MIDI processor for this patch and for the strings to switch out breath control, which comes from the WX5, to volume controller messages, which changes the volume of the output of that channel, and that way I can get dynamics in the strings. So here's an example. Okay, so how it sounds on the track. So that's the strings. Then switch to patch 4, and patch 4 plays, well, actually patch 4 on this is quite packed out, so there's a bit of explanation. The main thing is it plays the horns, which are the bit about the song I always remember the most. It's kind of the signature piece of the song, and it has 3 horns overlaid in harmony, and in this setup it kind of mirrors the original. I use a saxophone, the lower note, middle note I'm using a trombone, and the upper note a trumpet. Now I want to use the VL70 because they're the most authentic sounds compared to the MU50, so I use the VL70 for the bottom note sax. The middle note I use a trombone setting on the MU50, which isn't brilliant, but it's okay. It still has the problem about not responding to breath control messages, so the MIDI processor swaps again breath control for volume, so I can get dynamics. And then the third horn is a trumpet. Now I did try with the trumpet in the MU50, but it's a bit rubbish, and because it's such a key part of the song, I couldn't live with it. So I used a second VL70. I didn't explain that in the original setup because normally in my setup I only use one. I do have the luxury of having a spare VL70 with a patch from chip. The reason is because I perform with my band. I'm always worried that something's going to break, so I always have a backup. So I've got a backup of pretty much everything. So for this special video I used the second VL70 to play the trumpet. But I didn't show that in my original intro. So when you put them all together, it sounds like this. So that's the 3 horns playing together, and I can get dynamics. And it sounds okay. Now the thing you notice about that is that they're sustained, they don't switch individual. I don't play one note, stop that note, play the next one. Again, I've fallen back to the trusty MIDI processor to help me with that. And what it does, it's programmed to, if you know about MIDI messages, when you play a note, when you blow, whatever note you're holding, there'll be a note on message sent. The sound generator turns the note on. When you stop blowing, there'll be a note off message sent, and that tells the sound generator to stop playing. So what I do with the MIDI processor, just for that piece alone, is I filter out note off messages until I play that 3rd note, and that is what enables me to sustain them. So that's quite a neat sound. There is a sustain function with this WX5. I don't use it because I hate playing between different buttons whilst I'm actually performing. It's so prone to errors, and I don't know if it would do that anyway, but that's how I get around it. So this is how it sounds. Okay. Then the next thing I do is immediately switch to strings, which is still on this patch, and I split the keys so that actually I play those horns by pressing the first lower octave, and that's what tells the MIDI processor that I want horns. And when I release that and play the middle octave and the first upper octave, it's playing strings. Okay, so I'll play the strings straight away after that horn section without messing around with patch changes, which is really handy. And then the final thing I do is to insert a guitar chord. In the original, after the strings, there's a guitar chord. I program that into B of the first octave. The MIDI processor replaces it with a guitar chord. Again, that's the MU50 and not a brilliant sound, but it's okay. And when I play that, I re-enable recording on track 2 so that it's laid down on the track and then play to the end of the song. So this is how it sounds with the strings and that guitar chord inserted. Okay, so that's now guitar chord is laid into the track, and then I move on to patch 6, not 5. There was a reason I put it onto 6. The reason is later in the song when I'm playing patch 4, those horns, I need to very quickly change the patch, a new patch for a different horn arrangement, and I'll explain that a bit more in a moment. So I'm on patch 6 now, and this is keys. Really nice chords there, and there's also bells. So the way it sounds, the way I play it is. Okay, and then I insert that on. I record it onto track 3 so that again it plays the right way through. And what it's doing is building a crescendo in the track. So it's more volume, more fullness. So this is how it sounds, and this is how Okay, so sounding good. So after that, I change back to patch 4 to play the horns again, that signature piece over the full arrangement with the keys, and it sounds like this. And so on. Then back to the strings, play the strings which you remember on the same patch, play that whole string through. And then there's one thing I do which I mentioned earlier. I like to keep patch 6 reserved for a different horn arrangement for the final horn sounds. But what I do is I hold on to the strings, at the end of the strings, so that final D that's played on the string arrangement, what I do is to switch patch to patch 5 while I'm holding the note, and it's a bit of a trick there, because what it does is it means that there is never a note off being sent to the MU50 to turn those strings off, so they're sustained. So that tone with the strings is played to the end of the track, and again it's adding fullness and a crescendo to the song. So I'll show you what I mean. I play the D, I switch to the next track, I stop the note off being sent, and now it's sustained, so the song now has that to add body and crescendo. Then after that, I do the final horn arrangement. And then I just play that out. But although there's 2 arrangements there, there's that one, and then so I played that 4 times, and then the second 4 times, the trumpet, that arrangement there is as before as the saxophone, horn, trombone and trumpet, but the second arrangement puts the trumpet an octave higher. So the first one is this, and then the second 4 are. So it kind of it's building up to the end. Again, the MIDI process is doing that for me. I change octave. It knows that I want a higher octave on the trumpet, but not the other parts. So it transposes back the saxophone and trombone back to the original key, and that's how I play out with that horn arrangement. And I also disable tracks successively to thin out to just the basic beat and guitar rhythm at the end. So let me just recreate the end bit for you, starting with the strings on patch 4. So I just had to kill that note. So that's it. That's how I do it. Different people do it different ways. People will probably have a lot more modern kit than I have that will enable them to do much better things than I can. Maybe dispense with the MIDI processor if they're sophisticated pieces of kit. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you maybe learned something, don't know, maybe it inspires you. If you've got any other comments or questions, by all means get in touch. I'll do my best to answer them, or if you've got tips on that I could learn from, by all means let me know. Thanks for joining me, and happy wind synthing.